That's such a depressing thing to hear.
Yeah.
Because that's just a cycle of violence, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The one thing I would say, and I'm not saying all of these boys are victims, but I find that some of them are. They're enticed into gangs by elders in the community that, you know, shower them with, you know, the latest gifts that they want that they can't afford to, you know, get, you know, from their parents. And then before you know it, you feel like you're in debt to the gang leader. You're set up on a run, which you're literally set up on, and you know you're delivering drugs and they get robbed. You know, you're set up, you know, and then you're automatically in debt with the gang, and the only way you can pay off that debt is to do more runs. And by the time you've done all those runs to pay off the debt, you know, you are a fully cooperative member of that gang because you've been groomed. You know, grooming is something that we often associate with paedophiles, but there are young boys out there that are being groomed into gangs, and that's why I wanted to raise the point yesterday about prison not always working. Prison is the end result. We need to start at the beginning so that these boys don't end up in prison.
Yeah. Omar?
The problem is, I think there are two things here. We discussed this yesterday. One is the cause and effect of what is leading to this situation, right? And the other is what we do with the ongoing current crisis, Omar. And look at the front page of the Mail. This is what incenses people, is that all of what you've just said, Alex, is, I'm sure, true, right? And as I made the point yesterday, in Scotland, it was young white kids, right? So I don't think it's about being black youths or white youths. It's wherever you are in the country, it can be different. But here you have one guy, right? This is a suspected drug dealer. History of carrying a blade, dodged jail yesterday, right? Twice he's been found with knives. This is him posing for a little selfie, grinning outside court and getting away with it again. He's back on the streets. So I don't think there's any fear here of punishment. And if you don't have that either, then you have the cause and effect, creating the gangs, creating the drugs, everything else.
Grooming
and then
kids.
you have no disincentive to stop doing it. I mean, surely it has to be both.
Yeah, but I think the police aren't consistent because I go into schools every single day running my business, Omar Inspires, and young people, they know they can get caught up to, you know, 2 or 3 times with a knife and just get a warning, a slap on the hand. They'll be like, yeah, but it's no big deal. I won't go to prison straight away. Some people do get caught and go not prison straight away.
If they got 5 years in jail mandatory for carrying a knife in the streets, would that have an effect?
100%.
Oh.
Definitely.
You see, that's interesting, because I've heard other people say the opposite. I believe it would. In the same way that with guns, when they made it mandatory 5 years, people stopped carrying guns.
Yeah.
And in the same way with acid, when somebody got a 20-year sentence, suddenly, guess what? People stopped using acid in the streets.
Omar, I wonder...
It has to be part of it as well.
I wonder whether it would have an effect, and, you know, you have a lot more experience of this than I do, in the sense that carrying a knife already carries with it a risk of either being stabbed or being caught, and that isn't enough. You know, if being killed isn't a deterrent,
this is what happens to them when
why
they're caught with
would
a
a
knife?
5-year sentence be a deterrent? I wonder whether these young people actually think through the consequences
They don't. I don't
when
think
they
they
put
don't
a knife in their pocket.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
They also look at this and go, oh, well, that's all right then. Get caught with a knife twice,
there's no respect for life. There's no respect for their own lives. They haven't been taught respect. You know, they're doing things literally without thinking.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's why I wonder...
We've all kind of agreed now, haven't we, that, you know, when we had this conversation yesterday, that a lot of what's underlying a lot of these factors can be traced back to kind of socioeconomic inequality, cuts to youth
Family breakdown.
schooling, well, all of these sorts of things. And so I think it's, you know, and then we say, oh, yeah, that's all fine, but let's talk about, you know, stop and search, because that's what we want to talk about, because it's, you know, it's easy to kind of moralise and it makes us feel good. Actually, what we need to be doing, fine, if we were able to
enact, it
exactly.
feels like a good solution.
If we're able to, you know, actually do a lot to tackle those underlying issues, to reduce inequality, to kind of find mentors for these young people, to like put lots of money back in our services, and then we see these numbers continuing, then, you know, we obviously need to rethink how the justice
But here's what I would say to
system
that. I agree with you, right? I totally agree, and I think we all would agree with that. But I remember when football hooliganism, for example, was a massive problem in the 80s. Every game was just a war zone. And the police eventually went, enough. And they infiltrated all the gangs, they put away all the gang leaders, right? And suddenly, football became, again, a safe place to go. You don't see anything like the level of violence.
Well, that's interesting because of that is an intelligence-led approach to policing. That is not stop and search, right? That is taking out the kingpins who, fine, you know, at one point they were probably victims, but ultimately, you know, in order to undercut the dynamics you have now. You need to take out the people at the top. You know, that's a very different approach to just saying we're going to alienate communities by stopping random young kids on the street.
Well, lots of innocent football fans were also pulled in right during that period because they couldn't tell one hooligan from an innocent fan. So,
if you look
and I'm not sure that's entirely.
If you look at the West Midlands approach, right? Okay, they've got the PCC at the moment saying everyone's saying, oh, it's working in the West Mids. Actually, they're saying we've taken an intelligence-led approach to policing. The number of people we're stopping is reduced. The number of arrests has increased because they're actually saying they've got, you know, they're trying to build trust with the communities.
I think that's an important.
But in your report about what's happening in Birmingham, 1 in 13 they're stopping has been caught with a knife because they've increased stop and search. It's a
because
crude,
they're doing it from an intelligence-led approach.
It's a crude weapon, but it's one I think that's got to be used because while it's true there are all these problems about long-term deprivation, you can't solve that overnight. But we've got a knife crime crisis right now, and we've got to sort that, I think, by extending stop and search.
Often, Alex, with these things, the communities themselves, which are, in the case of London, for example, most of the victims are young black boys, youths, and most of the attackers are young black boys, right? So there's a particular issue, it appears, in London, completely opposite in Glasgow, for example, where it was mainly white. So when you have a situation like that, I sort of believe it can only really come from within the community.
I think that the community also need to step up. We need to help ourselves because it's quite apparent that over the last 10, 20 years, the government isn't doing enough. Policing and the relationship with the community isn't great. So I think it is time that we had to take a look at ourselves and actually help ourselves as well. I remember when I was a kid, you couldn't really get in trouble that much because there were elders in the community. I know your grandmother. And so it was all that kind of stuff.
But the other difference,
but that's not there anymore. And there's a lack of respect between kids and parents and adults.
Okay, but how much of this is also drug-related? I think a lot. And I'll tell you why. In the villages where I grew up in East Sussex, there were never any drugs when I was a kid. You wouldn't go in a local pub and see people doing lines of coke and Maloos over there. Now it's everywhere. And that's just East Sussex villages, right? So God knows what it's like.
Which is a predominantly middle-class white issue.
Well, it is. That's what I mean. I don't think it's a black-white thing.
And it's a middle-class white issue, which is feeding off.
I agree.
President
Dick made that very point, that the middle-class white people pontificating about this, if they're all taking cocaine every weekend.
Why don't we do more stop and search of middle-class white people? And why don't we increase the penalties for middle-class white people?
Everyone is part of the food chain. Everyone's part of the food chain, literally.
And you get what some of these whites say, oh, but I don't buy my drugs from these boys.
Mine are decent drugs.
Exactly, but it all starts there, doesn't it?
So my point, Andrew, I don't know where you grew up. Where did you grow up when you were...
Swindon, council estate. There were no drugs.
And I bet, I just don't remember seeing anything like this when I was a young teenager, right? Back in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Now it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I really think that it all comes back to the gangs are operating mainly around drugs. Right?
I disagree with you.
The gang leaders.
I think that there are lots of gangs that aren't drug-related. It's more about territories and stripes and getting your badges and identity. And also about, also about who owns the roads. These boys, they're literally imprisoning themselves. I call them invisible prison walls because they don't leave their postcode. And when you think about the long-term effects of being in a gang, imprisoning yourself, the mental health issues that I've seen it go through, but obviously in the black community, mental health, it can be quite taboo. We don't like to, admit it.
Weakness. No.
Admit
Omar,
weakness. But
you work in this area, and as we say, have won awards for it. Is stop and search an answer? Is an increase in police numbers an answer? You've already said that you think an increase in sentences would work, but acknowledge that young people don't necessarily think of the consequences. What actually works best?
I'll be honest, so I'm working on something called Dosage, which is a program I'm going to run in colleges and schools and prisons. Now, to hit it on the core, these young people, there are 6 human needs, okay? Contribution is 1, significance is 1, love and connection is 1. They don't have any of this. So when they get in these police chases and they feel that adrenaline endorphin rush, that's a human need. We need that. But they're taking it from an alternative area. Love and connection. Broken families, they don't have that. Where do they find it? In a gang. So stop looking at police, stop looking at government. Look at what that young person needs. Schools need to change the curriculum and start teaching people how to live life outside of school rather than trying to teach them Pythagoras' theorem. When I was homeless, that didn't help my life. I had to learn how to live, how to make £1 to £2. That's how I learned. We live in a great city with opportunities, but I was denied 50 jobs. Why? I didn't have any experience. What did I do? Got involved with gangs. So help these young people. Let someone be their first experience.
So find the mentors.
Yeah.
Grace.
Omar has made that point absolutely brilliantly. You know, that there are these human needs that actually aren't, you know, are not being met in particular areas. But also, I mean, this problem of rising drug crime, rising drug use, it's to do with the fact that we live in a society and an economy where lots of those human needs aren't being met for an increasing number of people. We have this increase in inequality that sees people kind of join gangs for status. We have rising drug use because, you know, people basically are kind of trying to escape the drudgery of their lives, low pay, long hours, all these sorts of things. And there are things that you can do to tackle the underlying causes of an unjust and unfair society.
But I think the reason I think drugs is so important here is I think, Andrew, that the massive increase in anxiety and mental health issues, all these things, I think you can chart a lot of it back to drug use. I think a lot of kids are taking drugs, much harder drugs than my generation were ever doing at that age. Universities need to be awash with
There was a bit of cannabis, wasn't there, when we were kids, but I'd never heard of people taking cocaine. But there's now an argument, of course. Have we got it wrong about drugs? Should we now be thinking about decriminalising it? Because the illegal drugs trade, which is fueling the gangs, if you take the criminality out of it...
well, in California, right, so I've just been there for 3 weeks. California obviously has legalised cannabis, right? And there you have a situation where the prisons are massively overpopulated with a lot of African Americans in particular who were done on the 3 strikes and you're out
Under
rule,
Bill Clinton.
where they would be found with a tiny bit of cannabis. If that was their 3rd offence, 25 years mandatory in prison, filling all the prisons. So by decriminalising it, it's very interesting, the change in atmosphere around California. Adverts are everywhere. You know, it's all completely legal. Everyone's very happy. But actually, obviously, it's all very heavily regulated and carefully regulated and safe. And, of course, it's killing the illegal trade with all the rough stuff, which may be causing a lot of the problems.
It's the same in Portugal, where they've decriminalised pretty much everything, and you now have a focus on treatment and prevention, because people don't use and get addicted to hardcore drugs unless they have pre-existing problems.
You'll never get political agreement on that, though.
No.
Trust me. It's a long way to go.
It's not a vote winner, is it?
No. There's no more puritanical country in the world than America. And now you've got several states have already legalised cannabis. I think others will follow. And pretty soon America will be a place where cannabis everywhere is legal. And so I think if America can do it, we should be looking at ourselves and saying, has our war on drugs, in the way we've conducted it, actually had the complete opposite effect to what we hoped?
And another comparison with America, we're always depressed, aren't we, when kids are made to do these gun drills in classrooms.
And now our kids are doing knife?
Knife crime, stab wound, first aid lessons.
And in America, the gun thing is a cultural problem, right? It's just in their culture. I think knives, horrifically, are becoming in this country a cultural issue where young people think it's perfectly OK to wander around streets with large knives on them. Again, when I was young, this didn't happen.
Nope.
You didn't see kids in the villages of East Sussex carrying knives.
Thanks all very much indeed.